Okay, call the meeting to order. Start with our land acknowledgement. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather today is the land traditionally used by the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Chinootan people. We acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous peoples with whom we share this land today. Are there any declarations of a pecuniary interest in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. No presentations, but we do have a delegation this evening. I need a motion that the Council of the Township of Wellesley accept Mary Lichty-Neeb as a delegation. Moved by Councillor Seven, second by Councillor Wagner. All in favor? And that's carried.
Good evening, esteemed members of the Township of Wellesley Council, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I am here to discuss a vital community asset that has served as a hub for connection, education, and local commerce for the past 10 years, the farmers market, and the use of the pavilion in Wellesley for free. For over a decade, this market has been more than just a venue for buying fresh produce. It has been a community gathering space. It has fostered connections among neighbors, families, and local vendors. This market is a platform for local education, featuring participation from various organizations, including the library, and recently waste disposal services, whose aim to educate the public on sustainability and green initiatives beginning in our area. Local leaders have also utilized this space for community engagement, making it a vital part of our township's social infrastructure. One of our current obstacles is the cost of insurance, which can exceed $228 per vendor for just 8 weeks. To adapt, we have shortened the market season to focus on these 8 most profitable weeks. When the farmers market had to close for a year, the community response was overwhelming. People missed it dearly, and it is truly a gem of Wellesley Township. The return of the market last year was met with gratitude and excitement, showcasing its importance in our lives. Despite numerous challenges, we continue to overcome them because of the dedication of our volunteers and the support of our community. With the construction of the new community center, we understand that there are fiscal responsibilities, and I urge you to consider the broader community benefits just beyond the financial metrics. The farmers market is just not about generating rental income. It's about fostering relationships, supporting local businesses, and promoting a healthy lifestyle. It fills a unique niche in our community, providing a space that's accessible to everyone. We aim to create games and activities for all ages. Our vendors have even come together to throw a barbecue, with all the proceeds going to the Wellesley food cupboard. The land on which the pavilion sits was graciously donated by the Agricultural Society under the premise that it would continue to serve the community. I ask that you support us in minimizing these financial obstacles in running the farmers market for the sake of our community's unique social fabric, and continue to allow us to use the pavilion for free. Without the farmers market, we risk losing not just an event, but a vital aspect of our community's life that supports local entrepreneurs, those small businesses that are the backbone of our economy. In closing, I implore you to recognize the value of the farmers market as a community initiative that brings countless benefits to Wellesley. Thank you for your time and consideration. Together, we can ensure that the farmers market remains a vital part of our community for years to come.
Okay, Mary, thank you very much for your presentation. Very well spoken. Now, are there any questions to Mary on this? Yes.
Can you explain the insurance again?
Yes, so we require each of our vendors to carry insurance. So it's through a third party called Ducal Insurance that we use, which is through the cooperators, which is specifically for small venues like our markets.
Okay, and what was the cost?
For the 8 weeks, it's $228. So, sorry, I didn't look up. It's about $16 a week for the vendors to carry the insurance. I didn't do the math ahead of time.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Derek, Councilor Brick.
This might be a question for Danny, but what is our typical rental fee on the pavilion?
Thanks, Councilor Brick. The 2025 rates are $62.25.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
Question for Danny, that would be a reservation fee more than a usage fee?
Correct. That's a reservation fee to ensure that the pavilion is available for that specific group.
Any other questions? Well, my thoughts on this is, I use the market. Whenever we're in town, we go down to the market, and you're absolutely right. It's much more than a market, and I don't think any of the vendors are getting rich by what they're selling down there. I think it's a fantastic asset to the community, and I certainly would hope. I believe last year you received free rental as well.
Yes, we did.
Which in my mind sets a bit of a precedent. I think it's something that we should continue. It's not an expensive proposition to us, and the whole community benefits. I mean, I don't know why I should say this, but the price of some of those vegetables are just amazing. I mean, it's really a good place to go and stock up. So I would entertain a motion. I think our clerk has a motion. If Councillor Brick would maybe move that motion.
So the motion would read that the Council of the Township of Wellesley waive the rental fee for the 2025 Farmers Market, which is held at the picnic shelter at 1004 Catherine Street in Wellesley.
Just moving it. Could I have a seconder for it? Thanks. What's your name, Councillor Herget? Any further discussion? All in favor? And that's carried. Opposed? And there's one opposed. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Okay. So we're going to go into a public meeting. And the motion that the Committee of the Whole meeting adjourned to hold a public meeting with respect to the Community Improvement Plan. Could I have a motion for that? Councillor Herget, second by Councillor Brick. Any discussion? All in favor? And that's carried. I would ask the clerk to advise the method of advertising.
Notice of the public meeting was placed on the Township website, Engage Wellesley website, Woolwich Observer, and the Wilmot Tavistock Gazette.
And I'll ask the Director of Development Services, Tim Van Hinty, to bring forward the presentation.
Great, thanks, Mayor Nowak, and good evening, everyone. We're pretty excited to bring forward our draft community improvement plan for you tonight to a public meeting. No decisions tonight, so just a public meeting to present what we're putting forward, and certainly hear from any members of the public that are here or online that want to make comments. We've received a few comments already, either online. Not too many when I say a few, but lots of downloads of the plan from our Engage website, which is great to see because that's a new platform that we're using. And I won't really go into too many details. I'm going to call Nancy Reed forward. Nancy Reed is with Nethery Planning. You'll remember Nancy has been doing a wonderful job helping us out, put together this draft plan, and I'll turn it over to her for a short presentation, and then I can bring some closing remarks. So thank you, Mayor Nowak.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Is this on? Am I good? I'm happy to be here again. I've been in this room several times for some engagement sessions, and I was also in this room in 2017 to present you with your first CIP. So it's been a pleasure to be back and work with your community to do a review and update of your existing CIP. Next slide, please. Over the past few months, I'd say 6 or 7 months, we started in the fall, and we took a review of the existing CIP and some of the results and the applications that you've received and the money that you've invested in that, as well as just a review of the landscape, legislative landscape and broader housing landscape and everything that's happening with regards to planning in your community. We did a lot of engagement over December and January. Like I said, we had some tables out here and some markers and did a good review of what's happened and where you want to go with your community improvement plan. And over the winter, we drafted and came up with some new programs that we have since integrated into your CIP, and that's what we'll be presenting to you today. Next slide, please. In draft report that you would have received, you'll see all of the information that we went through, our findings, and how we came up with our recommendations for new incentive programs. Like I said, that included a legislative review, look at your new strategic plan, your recently new strategic plan, your existing official plan, what's happened with the region, other legislation, boosts for housing, and that's all been documented in this February 2025 background report and what has led us to the new incentive programs. Next slide, please. We talked a lot. So we had 3 stakeholder and business owner meetings. Like I said, in this room, we talked about what's working in the existing CIP, what needs to change, where would we like to see money invested, where it may not be, or where it currently is, where should we keep investing. And some of the key takeaways we heard were the previous CIP was focused on Wellesley and St. Clements, and maybe there's an opportunity to open that up. So we heard that. I wish I had brought my glasses, but, and I wish I had made the text a little larger. Provide further, so we heard a lot about sustainability and maybe providing a little bit more money to applicants who go above and beyond what may be required by the building code or your official plan or any existing guidelines. A need or a desire to look at agritourism and promoting agricultural tourism across the township. And again, that is looking at focusing and opening up the community improvement plan beyond just St. Clements and Wellesley and looking at the agricultural area. There was a strong positive reaction to the ROI, return on investment, from the existing CIP. So we heard, hey, this is great. Let's keep focusing and investing and putting money in these programs because there is a good return on that. Continuing to support the downtown core areas, and then also looking at housing, and not necessarily affordable housing, but different forms and options in terms of housing that are inherently maybe a little bit more affordable, like additional residential units. Next slide. So based on that, oh, that's so much better. Thank you. So based on that, the new 2025 CIP provides new updated goals that react and respond to everything I just talked about. There's new updated incentive programs. I'll walk you through those really quickly in a moment. New evaluation measures to make sure that we're responding to the goals and objectives of the new goals and objectives of the CIP. And then a few also improved design guidelines to help with additional residential units in particular. Next slide. So this is a menu of your incentive programs, or the incentive programs that we're proposing for the new 2025 CIP. Anything highlighted in gray is a new CIP program. Anything white is already existing. You already have that and you're already offering it. So I'll just walk quickly through the gray programs. So we have our additional dwelling unit grant, which would provide about $5,000 per property, and that's to provide one additional unit in addition to the primary unit of a property. And like I said, that's just more inherently affordable, and that's the way the province is going and what the province is encouraging. And we, based on a tour of the township, we're already seeing that happening, like really good examples of additional dwelling units, and also really good opportunities for additional dwelling units. So we got great feedback on this program. Also the agritourism grant. So this is another example of where we're talking about something secondary to the primary use of a property. So we're talking about providing things like bed and breakfasts, or uses that bring attention to or bring people to the primary use of a property, which is an agriculture. But secondary to that, and enhancing and promoting the beauty of the agriculture in your township. So $5,000 per property for an agritourism use. We have the building and accessibility grant already in your CIP. So here we're looking at improving the exterior of a building, or improving the accessibility of an existing building. Lots of examples of how that's already been used in the township through your existing CIP. A commercial and housing conversion expansion grant, mostly looking at your downtown areas and converting uses to housing or commercial, or improving existing commercial or housing uses in your downtown areas. Design and study grant, so providing a grant to help a landowner who wants to improve a building undertake design and studies that would help them understand what's required to do so. Facade, signage, landscape improvement grants, again, just looking at the exterior of a building and helping and providing small grants to help make that happen. That is, I think, the second most popular incentive program, if not the first, that has been undertaken so far since 2017. Next slide. There's also the parking optimization grant, so increasing the number of parking spaces or making it more clear where there's parking. We're at another gray one, which is a new program we're introducing, placemaking and pedestrian grants, so just improving how people can move around properties, to and from properties, especially in downtown areas, and providing things like outdoor seating areas and making places a little bit more pedestrian friendly. There's a planning application and building permit fee rebate that's already in your CIP. A sustainability top-up grant, that's where I'm talking about like recognizing if you go a little above and beyond, then the township would recognize that with a $500 grant. And then the big one, so all of the grants that I've talked about so far are probably small-ish, in the range of like $2,500 to $10,000. A tax increment equivalent grant, it's already in your CIP, but that's like a big ticket grant where you could, you'll get a certain percentage of the tax increase on your property after a landowner has put a significant amount of investment into redeveloping it. All right, next slide. So just in terms of implementation, we talked a lot with stakeholders about like what's working. Have you heard about this? What would make this work better? We heard a lot about applications, and while we agree that, I think we all agreed that applications should come on a first come, first served basis, there should also be a quick turnaround on like the review of applications and the provision of grants just to help landowners. Applicants are required to meet for pre-consultation. After being approved, applicants should start the project within 6 months as a guideline. Application requirements are outlined. The township already has application forms and agreements, and there are a set of urban design guidelines just to set a standard for what's expected out of investments from the township. And we've also updated those to deal specifically with additional residential units. Next slide. Okay, thank you. Tried to get through that pretty quickly, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Just, Mayor, could I add just a couple of clarifications? Is that okay? Councillor Higgett? So just a couple of things. So the additional dwelling unit program, this isn't something that's going to apply everywhere. So we're talking about core areas only, like areas that are core to our towns and villages. Those are already delineated in the official plan, so we know where they are. But you can think about it as St. Clements, Linwood, Wellesley, the core downtown areas. So it wouldn't be additional dwelling units we'd be funding everywhere. It'd be purposeful and direct that we'd want to get more, maybe apartments above stores or something where it would fit to get more people living in those areas. The dollar figures that you see on those slides are upward limits. Okay, so that's not, you don't necessarily have to give that amount every year. We don't even have to pick every program, right? But those are upward limits, and then every year, maybe twice a year, we haven't quite baked that out yet, is that we would come to you and say, okay, it's time to engage the CIP for another year. What programs are you interested in seeing this year? What are you hearing? Maybe staff will have gotten some inquiries by then saying, hey, you know what, there's a lot of interest in the agritourism piece this year. Maybe we should activate that one, but you don't have to do all these at once. In fact, we haven't done a lot of these yet. They're in the plan, but each year or each round we would activate those, and you guys would also set the dollar figure that you're willing to spend on that coming from the CIP reserve. So it's not kind of carte blanche for staff and businesses. You get some determination as to how you want to spend that money every year. And I think that was it, just a couple clarification things. So anyway, thanks, Councillor.
Okay, thanks. You answered the first question on ADUs.
Mine too.
The second question is, if you're approved for a grant, do you receive the money before you start or after you're finished?
So you get the money when you're complete, there's, I can't remember it, I don't have it all memorized, but there is a process there by which you have to, obtain your building permit. It has to be substantially complete, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, the short answer is it's after. Yeah.
Yes, Councillor Brick.
I had a question just about the first come, first serve kind of approach, and that's been our approach in the past, and obviously that came up in discussion. Are there other approaches that you looked at as different models, or what are our thoughts on the first come, first serve?
Well, we did look at, I have been researching, I've been looking at CIPs for about 20 years now, and there's two approaches, first come, first serve, or sometimes it's like a twice a year intake. And with a limited amount of money, generally we find that the first come, first serve creates a little bit of internal competition and creates some excitement about the CIP program. So that is the recommendation that we've taken.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think, it would be something along the lines of, application periods open, and the application period is closed, and what we get in that period, we could do that once a year, we could do it twice a year, however you see fit. But it's who gets in the door kind of first. But certainly if you want to do it another way, like we're still early. This isn't the final plan. It's a public meeting, right? So.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a clarification on the ADUs. So it is geared for the core areas, so the commercial areas. But I know we have several examples of strictly residential use in our commercial cores. Would the grants be applicable to those strictly residential units as well? Or are we really focusing this on getting additional residential units with the commercial use?
The CIP, previously it was tied to a commercial use, and now we're looking at incentivizing additional residential units as long as there's a primary residential use. So whether that's a mixed use or a commercial, it's just providing an additional residential unit. So not just commercial uses, but focused in your areas of Linwood, Cross Hill, Hawksville, Heidelberg, and Wallenstein. That answers the question.
Yeah, and we were quite specific in how we wrote that objective, as it's still subject to the zoning bylaw. So presumably if you're in a core area and you're zoned urban commercial or settlement commercial, you can still have that residential use above or behind. But yeah, if you're a settlement residential in the core area, you could have an ADU as well. So right, depending on what your zoning is, right?
I guess my question though was if it's zoned settlement commercial, but there's only a residential use on it.
Right.
I know we have several properties that are like that.
Yeah.
So do we need the commercial use to be there first for this to apply? Because otherwise, as you just said, the zoning bylaw wouldn't apply, right?
Right.
Because the residential use can only be behind or above
Right.
the commercial use. So if that commercial use isn't there, it doesn't follow the zoning bylaw. So I think I just answered my own question that this does not apply then.
Okay.
Your official plan and your zoning bylaw will absolutely take precedence, so it's only anything that would be permitted by those planning documents.
Any other questions? I had one, maybe directed to Tim. You talk about council deciding on 3 potential avenues to use the CIP. Does the council have any discretion? I'm just thinking of a situation where somebody comes to build another unit on top of a building, but it's not in that. It hasn't been approved in that setting. Can council look at that?
So do you mean outside the application period or after funding? You mean like after funding for the year has been used, somebody comes in later, or you just mean like look at the applications?
Yeah.
So the way that we've had it in the previous plan, and we're not proposing any changes, is that council sets the direction as to what they want us to fund and how much. And then staff is delegated the responsibility of reviewing the applications and making sure that those comply with your directions.
That's for that 1 year, right?
Yeah, and we would do it every year. So we would come to you at the beginning of every year, near the beginning of every year. So, yeah, but it's been delegated to staff, and that's the decisions on which applications to fund have been delegated to staff primarily so that we don't have to bring every application to council. Right? So you would say, you know what, we really want to fund program X, Y, and Z this year for X amount of dollars. And that kind of gives us our marching orders, and then we would advertise those and say, okay, applications are open for these programs if you have a project or something that you want to do. And then the applications would come in on a first come, first served basis up until a certain deadline. And then we would review those applications in that order. And we could presumably, depending on how many applications it is, you could decide whether, say, for example, if you got 10 applications, and you had $10,000 to spend, for example, do you want to spread that across the 10 applications if they all meet the criteria, like if they're all meet the criteria that are in the plan and what you guys set, or do you review and approve only some of those this year and then some the next year, right? It's kind of hard to say which way you want to go, but that presumably you could do it that way.
From what you said before, that won't be a decision of council. That'll be something that your committee will
Right.
decide on.
Right. So the CIP application review committee, as it stands right now, is the CAO, the Director of Development Services, and the Chief Building Official. So we're the ones, and that's not really any different than any other planning application where we review it. In this case, it's kind of you set the direction ahead of time, and we carry out that direction, right?
Yes.
If I could just further on that question a little bit, is there any wording in the CIP that would prevent a resident from coming to council and asking for them to go to stream A, B, or C if we've only activated X, Y, and Z for that year?
I don't think so. I don't think it would prevent them from coming here and requesting from council that they open that stream.
Right, because in the end, this is a policy of council, and unless there's specific wording that prevents it, council can override their own policy at any time and make a change for that year.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's flexible that way.
So there would be that opportunity, but for the applications that are approved in the streams that have been set by council, that authority would be delegated to staff to make those awards.
Correct.
Any other questions? Good. Thank you very much.
Excuse me?
Say what? Oh, is there a question?
Yeah, the plan is saying something about putting electric chargers in.
So we'll be coming to you in just a second in the next
I'll
piece
be
of
right
this.
with you. Just
Okay.
right. As a matter of fact, are there any questions from council? We've already gone through that. Are there any persons who wish to make oral or written submissions in regard to the public meeting? If so, would you please give your name, address, and postal code to the clerk? So I'll need that information from you, sir.
My name's Randy Schaefer. I live on Cressler Road in Heidelberg.
Okay. So your question?
I noticed on the plan that they wanted to maybe go with more chargers, but for the electric vehicles. I'm not against it. It's just that there was a meeting that the region put on last year, and I think it was in Elmira. And I phoned the gentleman about the charging stations that they had supplied in the region, and they said they made $6 on them last year. Is that something that they're planning on changing to go with the rates that they actually pay for themselves instead of just only making $6 off of a number of units that they're putting out there?
Okay. Who wants to tackle that?
Thanks, Mr. Schaefer, and thanks for the email today about that and your comments. So I think the section of the CIP that Mr. Schaefer is referring to is under the final appendix, which is the design guidelines. So the urban design guidelines, I think that's on page 67, I believe. And essentially what the design guidelines are, this isn't a plan where we're going to come to council with a number of recommendations for EV charging stations or where we're going to put them, or even if we were to put them in. I guess what this section of the CIP refers to is simply objectives and guidelines for what would we do with parking and driveways, et cetera, should we activate that grant program, right? So one of the parking optimization grant is one of the programs. So one of the objectives would be to provide electric vehicle charging stations throughout the settlement areas. That doesn't mean we're going to do that everywhere all the time. It means that if there is a project that comes forward that wants to put charging stations in, there is policy and design support for that in this plan. So it's not a plan by which we're coming to council to say, we want 10, 20, 30 charging stations. That's not the idea. The idea is that it's an objective that should the right project come along and council is interested in that, there is policy support for it. So it doesn't require council or the township to go and purchase EV chargers and put them in a bunch of places, if that makes sense.
And just to further on that, Tim, so these would all be privately owned chargers, right? The township, if activated, would provide some money through the CIP for the installation of this, but then the operation and cost going forward is on the private owner.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. Yep.
Okay, no. All right, no, you answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Anyone? Excuse me, none? Seeing none. Recommendation that the public meeting with respect to the committee improvement plan adjourn and committee of the whole meeting resume. Moved by Councillor Bick, second by Councillor Hergut. Discussion, all in favor? That's carried. We'll move right on to recreation. Councillor Wagner. No.
Are there any service board reports? Okay, seeing none, are there staff reports? Seeing none, or is there a director update?
There is a director update. Thanks, Councillor Wagner. The facility operators have moved to outdoor maintenance work this week. Sports fields have begun being rolled and fertilized as of today. The ice is out at the Bilgees Recreation Centre. The last day of ice was April 13th, 2025. Facility operator interviews have been completed and the recreation customer service interviews are scheduled for tomorrow. Lastly, the walking track memberships are now required for the hours at the Bilgees Recreation Centre when staff are not present. Current hours are Monday to Friday, 7:30 a.m. to 9 p.m. that the building is open, so the walking track members can access the facility starting at 6 a.m. until 11 p.m. 7 days a week.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the director? Okay, that's it for me then.
We'll move to Road and Bridge. Councillor Hergut. Oh, did I miss one? Sorry. I don't have planning. Councillor Brett. Oh, we'll come back.
Oh, you were right.
That's right. Yeah, I thought I was right. You got me all confused. Okay, we'll move to Road and Bridge.
Thank you, Mayor Nowak. 9.11 R&B 6/2025 Hessenstrasse, Maplewood Road, Hergot Road intersection improvements. Excuse me. I need a motion that the Council of the Township of Wellesley approve the recommended intersection improvements to the Maplewood Road, Hergot Road, and Hessenstrasse intersection to include the installation of oversized stop signs and an overhead four-way flashing beacon. Can I get a mover? Councillor Wagner, seconded by Councillor Seven. Does the director have a report?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Hergut. So this report identifies staff recommendations to improve awareness of the intersection at Maplewood and Hergut and Hessenstrasse. So Maplewood and Hergut are one road and then Hessenstrasse is the cross street. Intersection improvements at this location were brought up for consideration by a delegation last year. The recommendations are for extra large, so the 4-foot stop signs, and a four-way overhead beacon in the center of the intersection. After a lengthy analysis of the intersection, staff determined that the issue is surrounding awareness. These two measures will make motorists more aware of the intersection and the need to stop on the north and southbound legs of the intersection, and the overhead yellow flashing lights on the east and west approaches on Hessenstrasse will identify to through motorists that there's an intersection approaching. There are already intersection ahead signs, but the beacon will further that awareness. I also want to mention that the individual who brought these concerns up is not attending the meeting tonight, but did voice a couple concerns after reading the report in the agenda. The first was related to the collision data that I attached, or that's included in the report. A request from the Waterloo Regional Police Service showed 18 collisions since 2014. I'm only reporting 8. And that's because we had the staff sergeant look through the collisions in more detail and remove the ones that weren't applicable to the actual intersection. So what they do is the police, when they get a call, they attach it to a section of road or to an intersection, wherever that call comes in. So an example of something that would have been removed from the data was an incident that would have been a deer hit by a car 250 meters up Hessenstrasse. That's not related to the intersection. It has no bearing on intersection safety. So those type of collisions or incidents were removed. That's why the data shows only 8 incidents since 2014. So that was the first concern. Secondly, she asked that the area be made or consider being made a community safety zone. I do not recommend making this a community safety zone, as the roads are straight. There are no sightline issues. There's also no attractions such as schools, churches, recreational amenities that vulnerable people would be crossing the road to access, which is the case in the only community safety zone we have on a township road, which is through the S-Bends on Paradise Lake, where people own property on both sides of the road and children could be accessing the lake. And again, the sight lines are very poor and it's very narrow through that stretch. That's why we made it a community safety zone in the first place. So I just wanted to bring those to your attention in case they come up after the report, because the delegate couldn't be here. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that report. Are there any questions for the director? Councillor Brick?
Just one, and I think this is clarification, and so just clarification, Chris, this would be a two-way stop with ambers on the Hessenstrasse, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the north and southbound, which would be Herget Road approaching and Maplewood approaching from Paradise Lake, those are the stop-controlled sides of the intersection where we're talking about putting the extra large oversized stop signs. And then in that direction, you'd see the red flashing lights on the overhead beacon. And then coming down Hessenstrasse, east and westbound, you're right, you would see the amber flashing lights as you approach.
Thank you.
I just have one comment. Thank you for your report. We've been patiently awaiting, and I think it's a step in the right direction. So thank you. Any more questions or comments? I'll call the question. All in favor? And that's carried unanimous. Moving on, does the director have an update?
Yes, thank you again, Councillor Herget. So at this point, we're fairly confident that the winter weather is behind us. Can never be too sure, but we're hoping so. As such, we've begun spring cleanup activities, such as street sweeping started today from some of the sand that was deposited from the snow plows, repairing plow damage to the grassy areas by the snow plows using topsoil and seed and grass seed. And then lastly is spring grading, has also began on gravel roads. So those are kind of our cleanup activities that we do in the spring once we kind of figure that the snow is gone for the year. So those are all underway. Another one with today being Earth Day, there are several planned Adopt a Road cleanup events happening. One today by, I believe, the Lions in Wellesley. I know the Hurricanes are helping with that as well today. And then there's several others that are occurring over the next week. Lastly, Mornington is working to install more fiber optic lines throughout the west side of the township now. So if you see directional boring type activities going on along Deborah Glacier, Stryker, Schooner, Bueller, that's likely what you're witnessing. So that is fiber optic lines being installed in those rural areas. That's all I have for today.
Thank you. Any questions for the director? Okay. Mayor Nock?
How are you doing with potholes? Are you pretty well done with that program now?
Yeah, potholes are always an ongoing issue. The asphalt plants are just getting opened up, so hot asphalt is just, not that we use hot asphalt because we don't have a hot box or anything like that, but when it comes to doing some topping over larger areas that need it, we'll use hot asphalt. But yes, we were fairly caught up with our potholes. I don't believe ours ever got out of hand at all, and we were monitoring them regularly.
So there may be some more ongoing work.
There's going to be ongoing work throughout the summer.
Yeah.
For asphalt patching and things like that. So there will be pothole patching, which is temporary repairs, and then we've got our asphalt, which you guys approved last meeting. That asphalt tender we're going to do quite a bit of repair along Greenwood Hill and Hessenstrasse this year.
I assume this is probably one of your worst years for potholes.
Yes and no. We didn't receive a lot of calls related to township roads for potholes. No more than usual, I wouldn't say. And again, potholes are one of those activities where staff generally have time throughout the winter months to do pothole repairs. This winter, we were literally plowing every single day in January and February, so it didn't provide a lot of time for that. But because the temperature was below freezing, we didn't really see the potholes popping up until March. So March was a really, really bad month for potholes, but I think we were staying on it pretty good.
Thank you. Oh, I think we'll go back to planning. Councillor Brick.
Welcome back, Tim. I need a motion that P&D 5/2025, the Community Improvement Plan update for information, and the recommendation is that the Council of the Township of Wellesley receive this report for information. The mover, Councillor Seven, seconder, Councillor Wagner. Any further just to bring on that, Tim?
I don't know unless there's any other questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's carried unanimous. Does the director have an update?
I do, thanks, Councillor Brick. First is that the Development Services Department is now live, so we've merged with Planning, Building, and Bylaw to create a super department, and it's a wonderful group to work with, and I think it makes a lot of sense because we're always talking to each other about stuff anyway. So that's I'm pretty excited about that. I think the whole team is. Certainly as you know, the arena lands, the engagement, we set a couple dates for engagement on the old arena lands in Wellesley, so that's coming up. May 7th in Wellesley and May 8th in St. Clements, 3:30 to 8 p.m. It's a public session for people to come and give their input as to what the future holds for those lands. So I'm sure you've gotten all that. We've been advertising it, and quite a healthy discussion going on our Engage platform. So that's pretty exciting to see. Third, and finally, now that the CIP is getting close to the finish line, we're switching gears and going a little bit bigger on our official plan. So that's the big one. Working to put together a request for proposals for consultants to help us develop that. It's a fairly heavy lift, so along with myself, Bobby, Ethan will be doing some work on it as well. We will need a consultant to do some background work and running engagements and for us as well. So putting pen to paper on that and hoping to get that out in early May, and for starting the official plan process in spring. I'll say spring, which is the end of spring is June 21st. So that's all for tonight, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Hargett?
Do you have a target date of when the official plan, you're hoping to have it finished?
So that's always a great question, because it all depends on what kind of public reaction we get, what kind of public comments we get, what are the types of things that you want to see in your official plan. I would bank on a very fast official plan process is probably a year. A medium official plan process is probably 18 months, and a long official plan process is 18 months plus. I think we're probably somewhere in the middle there. And it also depends on what consultant you can get to do it, because everybody's doing their official plan now because the provincial policy statement was updated, provincial planning statement now. So lots of official plan processes going on, and consultants have limits to their work as well, right? So we're going to try for a 12 to 18 month process and see what happens.
Just a question. I know it's a big ask, it's a big project, but I think it would be good if possible to have that completed with this term of council. If at all possible. I think this council would probably be maybe a little bit more aware of what the challenges are as opposed to having new members that may not. They may, I don't know, but just my thoughts.
I'll take that into consideration. We'll do our best. We don't want to drag this out. We want to certainly complete it as quickly as possible, because there's but we also want to get it right, you know. So it's one of those things where there's so many factors, I guess, but yeah, we're going to move it along as quickly as possible. And I know there's a number of requests out there in the community for different settlement area adjustments and additions of land areas, and those will all be evaluated as well together in this process. So that can also take some time, but we will do our best.
Just a suggestion.
Yeah.
Not a direction, just a suggestion.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
That's all for
Hey, property and fire, Councillor Sutter.
I need a motion. P&F 4/2025. Recommendation that the Council of the Township of Wellesley award the contract to AWF Contractors Limited to perform drainage works as detailed in the Lichty-Leibold Drain Engineers Report dated December 17th, 2024, to a total bid price of $63,272.50 plus HST, and further that this amount be funded by the Township of Wellesley and recovered as per the assessment schedule in the Lichty-Leibold Drain Engineers Report and corresponding bylaw 5/2025. Can I have a mover? Councillor Brick, seconder, Councillor Herget. Would Amy like to bring the report forward?
Thank you. Through the process outlined in the Drainage Act, the petition for drainage work was received by the township in 2008. The engineer's report was received in December 2024, and the Court of Revision was held on February 25th, 2025. Through this process, affected landowners had the opportunity to appeal their assessments, with no one coming forward to oppose the drainage work. The tender process closed March 25th, 2025, with Public Works staff and the drainage engineer reviewing all bids received and made the recommendation to award the contract to AWF Contractors Limited.
Thanks, Amy. Is there any discussion or questions? Seeing none, I call the question. All in favor? Carried unanimous. Moving on to director's update, being as...
I received an email from the fire chief this morning that he has no update to provide tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to admin and finance, and we're going to start off with a staff presentation by Ethan Westbrook with regard to the asset management plan, phase 3.
Thank you, Mayor Nowak and councilors. So our consultant, Peter Simcisco from Watson, is here tonight to present and discuss the results of the asset management plan. This will include a levels of service framework, financial strategy, and a 10-year forecast regarding the township's infrastructure assets. The presentation will also include some various options and scenarios for these components. So the preliminary results of this plan have been reviewed by staff, and some revisions have already been made, aimed at reducing the tax burden while maintaining current levels of service. And the goal of this presentation and discussion is to receive direction regarding the proposed levels of service framework and financial strategy. And this will give Peter and the rest of the team at Watson enough time to have the final report ready for review and approval by the May 13th council meeting. And finally, I just wanted to thank our internal team for all the work and insight throughout this process. And then I also wanted to thank Peter and his team at Watson for all the great work and expertise they provided on this project. And with that, I'll hand it over to Peter to lead the presentation and discussion. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to be back in Wellesley once again. And thank you for the introductory comments, Ethan. So as mentioned, today's presentation, the intent is to provide council with an update on the work that's been happening on the asset management plan, with a key focus for today being on the financial strategy aspects of that asset management plan. So I will start with, if we could go to, we could go to the next slide. I'll just call it, that might be safer. So I'll provide just a little bit of a regulatory context. I'm sure council is aware by now that all municipalities in Ontario are required to develop asset management plans for all of the assets that they own and are responsible for. The regulation is 58817. The regulation itself came into effect in January 1st, 2018, I believe it was. And the regulation did provide municipalities several years to come into compliance, with the first two major phases of that work needed to be completed by July 1st of last year. That required municipalities to have an asset management plan that provided some basic information about the assets that they have. So it had a summary of the assets, information on the replacement cost valuation of those assets, general information on what condition those assets are in, and what the current levels of service are that those assets are supporting. Looking ahead to July 1st of this year, this would be the final phase of compliance with the regulation, and municipalities are required to extend on the work that's been done to date in two important ways. Firstly, the asset management plans for this year are required to identify what the proposed levels of service are for each municipality, and then identify what specific investments in terms of life cycle activities, in terms of renewal and replacement of the assets would need to be planned for to achieve that proposed level of service. And once those costs are identified, the second major element of the final asset management plan is a detailed financial strategy, which needs to look at what is the level of funding that's currently available and how does that compare to the level of funding that's required to achieve and then sustain the proposed level of service. And if there's a funding gap that's identified, the plan needs to be very specific in identifying how that gap will be managed. And that can be done in a number of different ways, typically either through committing to ramping up funding over time to a more sustainable level, or potentially going back to the level of service targets and reducing those in some areas, or potentially a combination of both of those, just to name a few examples. So very much in line with kind of the timing of phase-in of the regulatory requirements. If we can go to the next slide, the township has been on its asset management journey for several years. The culmination of the first two phases of the asset management plan were brought to council in May of last year. Again, that plan included all of the township's assets, provided a state of the local infrastructure section, replacement costs, current condition, current levels of service. And since that time, we've been working with the township staff team to take that work further, to look at what proposed levels of service for the township might look like in each of the areas. And a lot of work has gone into the financial strategy aspect of this as well over the past several months. So we've been able to analyze the levels of funding that are currently built into the township's budget that's available for these capital needs, assess those relative to the future funding requirements, and then to quantify what the potential financial impacts in terms of the tax levy the township would be facing to help start closing the infrastructure funding gap. We did also look at a couple of options to help mitigate some of the financial impacts, and so in today's presentations I'll be speaking to those options as well. So if we can go to the next slide, just to start with, first of all, what are the assets that the township owns and is responsible for? The table on the right-hand side provides a summary of all the assets that are within the scope of this asset management plan. And that spans everything from roads, various assets related to transportation or roadway infrastructure such as sidewalks and streetlights, bridges and culverts, as well as the underground stormwater infrastructure that exists and to some extent not all underground, as well as the stormwater ponds, for example. There are various facilities that the township has and manages, parkland amenities, as well as a portfolio of fleet and equipment assets that support the provision of services as well. So all of this information in terms of the summary of the assets was previously presented in last year's plan. We have updated the replacement costs to bring them into today's dollars, looking at what the replacement costing of the various assets would be in today's dollars. And that total replacement cost of that asset portfolio has been estimated at about $395 million. So a significant asset portfolio, certainly. When we look at that on a per household basis or on a per unit of property assessed value, for a typical household, typical two-story home within the township with a current value assessment of about $402,000, I would note that that's not meant to reflect market value, that is the taxable assessment as determined by MPAC. So for that typical two-story home, that household would indirectly own about $75,000 worth of municipal infrastructure that they're ultimately responsible for helping pay for its renewal and rehabilitation and replacement as those needs come up. So again, a fairly significant amount of investment that's been made into the infrastructure that supports the provision of municipal services. I would also note that that level of asset ownership, if you will, is very much in line with what we're seeing across the province for municipalities with a similar set of infrastructure and services. So with that in mind, on the next slide, we have a summary of the various approaches that were taken to assessing the current condition of the assets. I would note that township staff have done quite a bit of work to help define and understand that condition. Historically, a lot of planning was done based on the age of assets. And then while that's perhaps appropriate for some assets, maybe vehicles and equipment to some extent, there are a lot of other assets such as roads, facilities, where the age of the asset can be a very poor indicator of the actual physical condition that the asset is in. And so the township has completed a physical condition assessment of its road network that was done with internal resources. The township, just like all other municipalities across the province, assesses the condition of bridges and culverts every 2 years as required by provincial regulations. And then for facilities, there were a variety of approaches taken as well, where some facilities were very formally assessed by an external consulting firm. A couple of the facilities are very new, so they weren't deemed to require a condition assessment at this point in time. And then there were some other facilities that were assessed at a component level by township staff as well. The final item I would like to note here is the fleet and equipment category. As I mentioned earlier, it is very common practice for municipalities to assess the condition of those assets strictly based on age relative to a useful life expectancy. This is where the township went a step further, and we've worked with staff to identify the actual observed condition of the fleet and equipment assets as well. Not necessarily for all the minor equipment, but certainly for the larger vehicles and equipment assets. Those have had a kind of assessment completed in addition to that age-based analysis. So I think what's in the asset management plan is a good understanding of the current condition or health of the asset portfolio. So on the next slide, we have a summary of this concept of levels of service. And the detailed levels of service framework for the township's assets was included in the plan that went in front of council last year. And that levels of service framework looks at what is the service that the different assets are supporting. And we look at that through different lenses. A lot of it comes down to quality, for example, so how well maintained and how good are the roads, for example, how well maintained and in what state of repair are the facilities. But it's also about other items such as accessibility, because for example, a facility could be in a very good working condition, but not necessarily be fully accessible to all individuals. So listed on the little text box on the left-hand side of the slide are the various service attributes that are considered within that levels of service framework, and then some specific examples for how those get translated into technical performance measures as reported in the asset management plan are provided in the table on the right-hand side of the slide. So the table specifically looks at the levels of service or the technical performance measures and metrics that were developed and identified in the asset management plan for fleet and equipment assets. And again, a lot of it comes down to understanding the quality or reliability metrics with respect to these assets. And so last year's plan looked at what the current performance is, or what that current level of service is for each of these metrics. And as part of this phase of work, we need to identify what is that proposed level of service. And so without going through each and every metric, because there are a lot of them, and council will certainly have an opportunity to see those in the final report that will be brought forward next month. But a key focus has been placed on the quality and reliability aspect. So in summary, trying to ensure that all of the assets are maintained in a fair or better condition, so in good working order with reasonable reliability, and also, again, the quality aspect in addition to reliability as well. So generally maintaining assets in a fair or better condition, maintaining roads at a pavement condition index of about 79, which is a typical initial target for municipalities to set for their roads networks, keeping the bridges and culverts maintained in line with the recommendations coming out of the reports that are completed every 2 years, as well as maintaining all of the current facilities that the township has. So with that in mind, on the next slide, we have a summary of how we went about developing the lifecycle management strategy. And the lifecycle management strategy has two key components. Firstly, it looks at what specific lifecycle activities, again, in terms of renewal, rehabilitation, replacement, need to be planned for over the next 10 years. And that gives us, and as I'll show you in just a little bit, gives us an idea of the level of expenditures that the township is expecting over the next 10 years. However, recognizing that a lot of the infrastructure is long-lived, certainly the stormwater mains that are underground, a lot of the facility assets have a very long life and don't necessarily, or not all of them at least, won't require significant rehabilitation or renewal over the next 10 years. But we do want to plan for the full life cycle of the assets as well. And so what we done through the asset management plan is try to identify what those average annual life cycle costs are of each and every asset when we look at its full life cycle. And that average annual life cycle cost basically represents the annual consumption of that asset that should be funded each and every year to provide financial sustainability for that asset portfolio over the long term. And so this is an area where, again, quite a bit of work was spent on identifying what those average annual life cycle costs are. For some assets, that's relatively simple. When we think about a vehicle or a piece of equipment, we're thinking about what is the replacement cost of that item, what is its typical life expectancy, and dividing that replacement cost by the useful life. For facilities, however, for roads and structures, so bridges and culverts, that life cycle has a lot more to it than just a replacement at the end of a useful life. So there are various rounds of resurfacing for roads, various rehabilitations and major repairs that get performed on bridges, and certainly for facilities, there are many component parts that require replacement or renewal at different points in that life cycle. And so the analysis tried to capture all of those elements or aspects of each asset's life cycle to determine what the average annual life cycle costs would be. So with that in mind, to get into some of the financial information, on the next slide we have a summary of the 10-year capital forecast. That's based on where the information currently sits. So the bars correspond to the capital expenditures that we're expecting over the next 10 years. This include all of the assets. So again, includes replacement of vehicles and equipment. It reflects some of the major renewal activities expected for facilities, various road rehabilitation treatments as well. So this presents the total capital expenditures presented in today's dollars over the next 10 years. I would note, and as is highlighted with the little text box on the right, that big spike in 2035 is related to some major renovations or rehabilitation renewal of the St. Clements Recreation Complex, which is expected to be at that point in its life cycle within the next 10 years, where that should start to be planned for. And I believe in today's dollars, that's about a $15 million facility that is going to require that major reinvestment over the next 10 years. So that's what's causing that big spike relative to the average in the last year. So on average, over the next 10 years, there's just north of $5 million of average annual capital expenditures that we're expecting the township to face over that period. And what's also illustrated on the slide here is that annual life cycle funding target, and that's the horizontal dashed line, which corresponds to the average annual life cycle costs when we take the full life cycle of all the assets into account. And I'll speak in a little bit more detail as to how that was determined on the next slide. I would note that that average annual life cycle cost is going to change over time, as identified through the development charges study that the township completed last year. There are various expansionary or additional assets that the township might be taking on as well over the next 10 years as development takes place and in order to sustain service levels as that development is happening. So for example, there were some conversions of roads that are currently gravel to paved surfaces as traffic volumes increase that are planned within the development charges study. There are expansions to certain facility assets that are planned for within that study as well. And while the development charge is a mechanism that will help fund the initial acquisition or construction of the asset, once that asset is in service, it becomes the township's responsibility to look after the ongoing life cycle costs of that as well. So we've kind of forecasted out what those future life cycle costs will be as well in light of the expansionary assets that are planned over the period as well. So what's illustrated on the slide here are two important things. So firstly, on the left-hand side, or the bar on the left, shows the total annual life cycle costs of that asset portfolio as it sits today. In total, the average annual life cycle costs have been estimated at about $6.4 million. And so ultimately, that represents a funding target in terms of how much money should be put aside each and every year to help sustainably manage those assets over the long term. In terms of what comprises that overall life cycle cost or funding target, the vast majority of those costs are related to the core infrastructure or roads and related infrastructure, being roads, bridges and culverts, sidewalks and streetlights, and the stormwater infrastructure. Those together are about $3.1 million of the total, so about 48%. Facilities are about $2.1 million in annual life cycle costs, so that represents about 31% of the total. Fleet and equipment are at about $1.1 million of annual costs, which represents another 16% of the total. And then the park amenities represent about 3% of that total annual funding requirement. So relative to that average annual life cycle cost or ultimately funding target, we're looking at what is the level of funding that's currently available for these assets as identified in the township's 2025 budget. So that's illustrated with the stacked bar on the right-hand side of the illustration. And total budgeted capital funding for 2025 is sitting at about $3.98 million. There are three major components to that current funding amount. Firstly, we're looking at what sources of external funding, but these kind of stable and predictable sources of capital funding that the township has available. And this typically includes the CCBF, or formerly gas tax funding that municipalities receive, as well as the annual OSIF allocations as well. So those are identified in there. Those represent about 28% of the current funding amount. We then look at the level of annual debt payments that the township is making, because those debt payments are related to previously constructed or acquired capital. And once that debt is repaid, that's money that's already budgeted that can be diverted to life cycle reserves. So it's included in that capital funding capacity, if you will. So current debt payments represent about 24% of that annual funding amount. And then the largest share, which is the top portion of the bar, represents the budgeted transfers to capital reserves and reserve funds. So those are budgeted for 2025 at about $1.9 million, and so that represents about 48% of the current capital funding that's built into the budget. So when we compare the current funding of, again, just under $4 million to the average annual life cycle costs, which represent our funding target for the current asset portfolio, the difference between the two represents the annual life cycle funding gap. And currently that's been estimated to be about $2.4 million. So again, that's the annual capital funding gap that exists currently. And so in the next section of the presentation, we'll kind of look at what it would take to, and what it would mean in terms of financial impacts to close that funding gap. The first illustration I'll share with you, which is on the next slide, is looking at what is the current typical tax bill for a, again, typical two-story home within the township with a current value assessment of about $402,000. So the township share of the tax bill is about $1,500 based on the 2025 tax rates. And you see how that breaks down between the amount of that tax bill that's going to fund operating costs, which is the dark blue or the lower portion of the bar, and then the portion that's going to fund capital needs, which is the upper or lighter portion of the bar. And what we're then illustrating with the bar on the right is how much higher that tax bill would need to be if the township was fully funding the average annual life cycle costs. So again, addressing that full extent of that annual funding gap that was presented on the previous slide in a single step. Just to be clear, not suggesting that that's a viable strategy, not suggesting the township should aim to close the funding gap in 1 year. We'll get to that shortly, but just for illustrative purposes, that's how much higher that tax bill would be if the township was fully funding its life cycle obligations. And so that would represent an increase of about $457 to that current tax bill, which is an increase of about 30% on that township portion of the tax bill as of today. So then just for some context, because I thought this was interesting when we were looking at the results internally, on the next slide we have a comparison of tax bills for a selection of municipalities. I believe it's about 130 or just under 130 municipalities across the province that participate in this annual comparison survey, which is undertaken by BMA Consulting. And it shows the full extent of municipal taxes on different types of properties. So this chart includes both the township share of the tax bill as well as the regional taxes and any school board taxes that would apply for that same average two-story home with a current value assessment of about $402,000. And so what that shows is that that current tax bill within the township relative to the other surveyed municipalities would put the township at the beginning of the second quintile of that distribution. And so just for some context, in the hypothetical scenario where the township would close the full annual funding gap in one step, so again, that 30% increase we looked at on the previous slide, that would put the township about partway through the third quintile within that distribution. So just to provide that broader municipal context. And what's important to note is that virtually all municipalities across the province are going through their asset management planning processes right now in determining service levels and financial impacts. So we are expecting that tax burden to start increasing over time in all municipalities as municipalities identify or quantify their annual funding gaps and start working towards closing those. So on the next slide then, we have a illustration that summarizes the overall financial forecasts for the township under the, what I will call a baseline level of service scenario. So recall this is maintaining all assets in a fair or better condition, so generally in good working order, not letting things get to the point where reliability is starting to suffer, where maintenance costs are starting to get really high, trying to ensure that roads are maintained on average at a pavement condition index of around 80, or I think it was 79 more specifically, maintaining all the facilities in a state of good repair, and it's also maintaining all the facilities that the township currently has. So that would include the old Wellesley Arena as well. And then we'll look at some options around that in just a little bit. So just to step through the key elements of this chart here. So the bars in each year represent the level of expenditures that we're expecting in each year. For completeness, what's layered onto here are net operating costs that get recovered through the tax levy as well. And so that's the bottom portion of each of the stacked bars, or the light orange portion. We haven't done, through the asset management plan, a detailed analysis of operating costs. So this is strictly for completeness. It's assuming an annual inflationary adjustment in line with the consumer price index. So I believe about a 2.2% annual adjustments to those net operating costs. This doesn't look at any changes to current program staffing levels or anything like that. So it's in there for completeness. The top portion of each of the stacked bars represents the capital expenditures that have been identified through the asset management plan work. These are the same expenditures we looked at a number of slides ago, but this time also accounting for the inflationary adjustments or pressures that the township will continue to face into the future, because we are looking at a multi-year forecast, so we deemed it important to look at the inflationary realities as well. And to that end, the capital expenditures are being adjusted by I believe it's about 4.4% annually to account for capital inflation. and that is informed by the long-run historical trends within the non-residential building construction price index that's tracked by Statistics Canada, again, over the long run. And so the one other portion of the bars is the teal, the small portion sandwiched in between the two larger portions. That represents the annual debt servicing costs in terms of principal and interest, both for previously incurred debt as well as for any future debt that might be incurred to fund this capital plan over the next 10 years. So then relative to those expenditures, the first upward sloping line, the darkest one or the black one, represents the tax levy revenues that have been modeled to support this plan. And I'll get back to that in just a little bit. But in addition to the tax levy revenues, again, we recognize that there is a level of external funding that's available through the OCIF and the CCBF programs that will continue to be available. And then in some years, we are also showing that there might be a need to borrow some money externally to help finance some of these expenditures as well. And all of this is balanced out by the capital reserves and reserve funds, which act as a stabilization mechanism. And so that's illustrated with the purple mountain, if you will, that's sitting in the background behind the chart. As you will see, it's declining initially to a kind of minimum or floor that we've set for that reserve fund up until 2030. And then in some of the later years where total revenues are forecasted to exceed expenditures in those years, that reserve fund starts to build up a little bit again. But then again, with some significant expenditures that are expected in 2035, that reserve fund would be there to help offset a portion of those. But it is likely that the township would still need to borrow some money externally to finance the remainder of that major facility renewal when that does come up. But what we've tried to present is what would be a sustainable, fully funded strategy in light of both the 10-year capital expenditures that the township is expecting, as well as building up enough capital funding capacity by the end of the forecast period to fully fund the average annual life cycle costs on an annual basis. So not addressing the annual funding gap in one step, as illustrated with the slide earlier, but providing a 10-year phase-in, so a more gradual ramp-up of funding over the next 10 years. And so based on current estimates, this plan would require annual increases to the total tax levy of about 6.94% annually for the next 10 years. For illustrative purposes, again, we wanted to get an understanding of what this might mean to the typical tax bill. And so accounting for continued assessment growth that's expected as the township continues to see development, as again identified in the forecasting work that was done through the development charges study, as well as looking at historical averages in terms of how that total assessment has grown over the past 5 to 10 years. We are expecting that to continue growing at about 2.25% per year. And so the net impact on individual tax bills under this strategy would be a year-over-year increase of about 4.6%. Each year for the next 10 years. So that's kind of the baseline strategy that's been put together to date. In the next few slides, we'll look at some options relative to this baseline. So recognizing the size or magnitude of that financial impact, we've worked with staff to identify areas that might help mitigate some of that financial impact. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the ways to do that is to revisit the level of service expectations. And so what we've done is looked at a scenario of, first of all, looked at what are the big ticket items that are contributing to that life cycle need or that funding requirement. And to a large extent, that's roads. That's very common for any municipality. Roads are a big part of that infrastructure portfolio. So we looked at an alternative or reduced level of service scenario that would target a slightly lower pavement condition index of about 75. And that's achieved by stretching out the life cycle of roads, spacing out the life cycle interventions a little bit more. But by virtue of doing that, also then the underground infrastructure may need to live a little bit longer than otherwise expected. So I think under the baseline scenario, for example, we're assuming that stormwater mains would be replaced about every 80 years as those full reconstructions of roads take place. With the alternative level of service, those stormwater mains would need to live a little bit longer. So it is really looking at stretching the life cycle of those assets over a longer time frame. And then the second adjustment that's been made to the level of service under the alternative scenario is looking at how much of a reduction would be generated if the township was to divest of one of the existing facilities. And so specifically, we looked at the old Wellesley Arena facility and looked at how much of a reduction in funding requirements would the township see if it was no longer required to look after that facility because it was sold off or mothballed, and the township didn't need to worry about renewal and replacement activities in that regard. And both of these adjustments both have an impact on the short-term outlook, so in terms of specific capital expenditures expected over the next 10 years, but importantly, they also reduce that longer-term funding target because we have fewer assets on the facility side and lower average annual costs for the roads and stormwater mains on the other hand as well. And so what's illustrated with the table on the right is the reduction in the annual funding requirements that would be generated from those reductions in the level of service. Highlighted are the components of that average annual life cycle cost that would be reduced. So again, roads, the stormwater infrastructure, and then the facility assets. And in total, after we account for the external sources of funding, in terms of what would be required from the tax levy to sustainably fund this reduced level of service scenario, would be about $500,000 less annually, with the main contributor to that being the roads component. So that's the reduction in the average annual life cycle cost or funding target under the alternative level of service. On the next slide then, we look at, again, that same illustration from earlier in terms of how much of an impact this would have on the typical two-story home and on their township share of the tax bill. So as we looked at earlier, to go to the baseline level of service would require about 30% more funding annually. With the reduced level of service, only about 24% more funding would be required. So it is still a significant jump, but it is a reduction from that initial or baseline scenario that we looked at earlier. And so to put that in the context of that broader financial outlook, on the next slide, we have that same financial forecast illustrated again at the reduced level of service scenario. And the 10-year capital expenditures are slightly lower because some of the road life cycle activities are a little bit more spread out. We've removed the life cycle cost associated with the old Wellesley Arena from the picture as well. And so in total, the annual increases to the total tax levy under this reduced level of service scenario would be about 6.4% annually. And after accounting for, again, the ongoing growth to the current value assessment of about 2.25%, that would translate into a tax bill increase of about 4.05% annually over the next 10 years. So it is a reduction from about 4.6% annual increase to tax bills that we looked at under the baseline scenario. So then the final scenario we looked at is not about reducing level of service expectations or reducing the quantity of assets that the township is managing, but we looked at how assumptions around the funding mix influence the picture as well. And specifically, we looked at a scenario of incorporating an assumption that the township will be able to secure external grant funding beyond the OCIF and CCBF allocations, so more application-based grants that would cover about 5% of any future capital expenditures. So again, it's not saying which specific projects that would be applicable to, but on average, about 5% of the future capital needs would be funded through external grants. And so there's an additional element on the chart here. I know it's a little bit hard to see because at 5% of the total capital needs, it's not a big amount, but there's a red line that's going across this chart as well, which corresponds to that additional external funding that would be available under this scenario. That would reduce the total annual tax levy increases to about 6.04% per year over the next 10 years. And after accounting for growth, the impact on individual tax bill would be an increase of about 3.7% annually for the next 10 years. So again, there's a further reduction from the baseline scenario. I would note that there is a little bit more risk, obviously, with a scenario like this, because if the township is not successful with securing grant funding at that level, then the financial strategy would potentially need to be revisited and updated, and potentially there would be some further tax impacts with that adjustment. But with that, it is a requirement that council, once this plan is approved later this year, Council will need to review on an annual basis the progress that's being made in implementing the plan. So there will be an opportunity to annually review how much progress is being made, to look at any factors that may be hindering progress, and then to come up with a strategy to address those. And also the asset management plan itself needs to be updated at least every 5 years under the regulation as well. So further opportunity to reassess some of the assumptions underlying the plan. So in terms of next steps then, we have those on the next slide here. Again, as mentioned by Ethan at the beginning, we are looking to, first of all, obviously answer any questions council might have. I know there's quite a bit of information that we've presented here in terms of the financial impacts, but ultimately we will be looking for some direction on which of these options council is most comfortable with, so that that option can be built into the asset management plan, or potentially if there are other options or scenarios that council would like us to consider as part of this process. Following that, we will be finalizing the asset management plan report so that that can be brought back to council for final approval. We're expecting that plan to be considered for approval on May 13th. And then I just talked about some of the next steps in terms of implementing the asset management plan, reviewing progress annually, and updating the plan every 5 years thereafter. So that concludes the presentation rather, and happy to take any questions you might have.
Whew. My goodness. Questions? Yes, Councilor.
So you talked about maintaining level of service, then you talked about increasing level of service by possibly paving roads or other, because of population increase. How much of that 2.4 million shortfall is the increase that would be planned, or that is planned, or?
So the 2.4 million shortfall is strictly looking at the current characteristics of the assets. So the $2.4 million shortfall is just looking at the roads that are currently paved and maintaining them as paved. When we look at the end of the 10-year forecast period, in that end target, we've recognized that those life cycle costs will increase as roads get converted. So that is a number we could provide, I think, in follow-up, but in terms of the 2.4 million current shortfall, that's just maintaining what is as is.
Other question? No? So, how to frame this? The level of debt that we have right now, that's been factored into this. What would you anticipate with your program the way it is now? What would you anticipate the level of debt to be in 10 years from now? Are you assuming that we would have paid off our debt? Where are you with that?
Yes, so there are a number of outstanding debts that are expected to be fully repaid within the 10-year forecast period. So we've accounted for those. I believe there's some debt associated with the new recreation complex that will certainly continue beyond the 10 years. And there is some additional debt that would be required to fully finance this capital plan that's in front of you now. So I don't have the exact number with me tonight, but it is certainly something that we could provide in follow-up in terms of how much additional debt would be required to support this plan.
Yeah, I was curious to that. So if we were to give you direction to look at option 3, I'm just hypothetical. You mentioned there would be risk in option 3. And if we identified some risk or some risk came our way and we had to increase our debt to cover that risk, would we be able to? I think we have sufficient. So maybe the best option would be to gamble a little bit and look at option 3, I would think. I mean, to go any higher, we also have, now did you account for the, what's the 1% that we have for our
Infrastructure levy?
And the infrastructure
Yes.
levy, that's included in that?
That's included, yes. So when we looked at how much capital funding is built into the budget currently, that infrastructure levy amount is included in that as well.
So when you say 3.7, that includes the, I think you said 3.7 on an annual basis, that includes the infrastructure levy?
Yes.
Okay. And would it include the greening levy that we have as well? Possibly not.
That's a good question. I'm going to have to get back to you on that one.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, how to,
I suspect not, only because if correct me if I'm wrong, but if the greening levy is not necessarily targeted at renewal and rehabilitation of existing assets, if it's in addition, like any improvements that would be made, then that would not have been included in our assessment, because it's not, again, looking at the life cycle needs of existing assets, it's looking at potential improvements or enhancements.
so I think it's important. I'm glad to hear that the infrastructure levy is included in that 3.7%, because that really is not that far off from where we've been going for the last couple of years. We've been in that range. We've been a little higher in some cases. So it may not scare as many people as it started to scare me when you started talking about this. Any other questions?
I guess this is a question that, so obviously a lot of content in there. Will this presentation be shared with us sooner than later, or are you looking for direction tonight? What's the next steps there?
That's a good question. I think ideally we'd get some direction tonight. That being said, if you need appreciating that there is a lot of content there, certainly the presentation can be shared with council that lays out those options. There will be a lot more technical detail within the report itself. What we wanted to do is engage in this conversation with you now so that you don't have a report in front of you that has 3 or 4 or 5 options. We want to kind of center in on what is the path forward and then develop a plan around that with the full technical details.
Yeah, I think for me, there's a lot of information that comes forward here. So to really make a recommendation, I'm not comfortable at this point tonight. I think there's some good direction within there, but I'd certainly want to take some time and review it a bit further. And if that means pushing the deadline back a bit, I don't know what your timelines are or what our timelines are, but I think there's some things to digest still.
Peter, can you just go over the legislative timelines when we have to have this complete into the province by?
So the final asset management plan needs to be approved by council by July 1st of this year.
So currently, we're hoping to bring this back on May 13th at the council meeting, but the latest we could do it would be the June council meeting. And just to add to that, I think what you're really hoping for direction on right now is the level of service and the comfort of assuming some grant funding moving forward.
Correct.
Basically? Yes. So I think if council wanted to review the package for a week, or if we had an answer back by next Monday even on a direction, we might still be able to bring something to the May 13th, but worst case scenario, we could bring that back to the June meeting then, I guess, right?
Yes, and that was done intentionally to build in some buffer at the end in case, again, we didn't know where the impacts were going to land. Obviously, the impacts are still notable, right? I would say that a large part of that is just inflation, right? And accounting for that in its own, even just maintaining current funding levels would require some increases moving forward as well. But certainly, again, there is some flexibility in that timeline if need be, to make sure that everyone's comfortable with the plan that's ultimately brought forward.
Yes.
And this is just, I guess, in terms of public input along the way, there's been opportunities for the public to see this along the way, but there's no formal public input portion to this plan, correct?
Not at this stage. I think really our plan was to engage with council throughout this process and to get that direction from council. We do see some examples of municipalities engaging with the broader public through this process. That might happen over the next 5-year kind of implementation phase, and that might be combined, for example, with the annual budget cycle. So there are many different ways that input can be sought. But at this point, for this particular asset management plan, we have focused on that engagement with yourselves.
Yes. And Peter, I think it's safe to say that this is a strategy. It's not a set in stone plan. So every year, council will still have to consider this at budget time, right? And set your budget accordingly. But this is a tool that you'll be using in setting your budgets that tells you what the cost of that asset replacement is. Right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So, yes.
Sorry, has this might be a really stupid question.
No, there's no stupid.
Has any thought been given to extending the life cycle of equipment and machinery? Would that affect this at all?
Yes, potentially. I mean, we did already, I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, there was quite a bit of work and emphasis that was placed on not just using age and kind of taking that as is, but looking at individual, and not necessarily minor pieces of equipment like chainsaws, but vehicles and major equipment. Staff did go through that, did look at some vehicles that might be theoretically beyond their useful life, but said, you know what, this is still going to last us another 3-5 years because we know how reliable it's been. We're not spending a ton on maintenance. So that assessment was done. And to your question about extending the useful life, there were certain, I can't remember exactly, but there were a couple of pieces of equipment that the way that they are deployed and they're in contact with salt, I believe it is, they're not lasting as long as that theoretical useful life would indicate. So the useful life for those was shortened. But it can happen the other way. So a lot of that assessment has already taken place.
So how are we going to move forward? Are we going to, my suggestion would be if you could come to us with some very specific asks, so we know exactly what you're looking for, maybe with a little bit of rationale behind each one. And that would be after you've had a chance to review what's been said tonight. Is that fair? I'm just trying to figure out how we're going to move forward with this. I know we have deadlines.
So Peter's been working with staff on this a lot, especially with Ethan, but the entire senior management team that deals with assets. We had a meeting 2 weeks ago. And that's where we rehashed a lot of the numbers here and came to that option 3, which we all felt was probably a fair way to go. We think that eliminating the current Wellesley Arena could happen. That level of service does, the old Wellesley Arena, that level of service reduction does no longer take care of that building. And then the pavement condition index was also dropped down to lower that piece. And then we talked a lot about, how much grant money will we get from upper levels of government through application based over the next 10 years. And we felt that 5% is probably a historic number of roughly where we sit. We've received grants for facilities and for road work before, so we anticipate that would keep going. And we were cautious of fully funding a plan. Then when application-based grants do come out, what's the incentive for the upper levels to give us money at that point if we've already funded the entire thing? So, being cognizant of what the taxpayer can afford to pay and what we need to do with our assets, that's where we came to that kind of option 3, or the third scenario of the reduced level of service with the 5% assumption in grants. So if council was comfortable with that assumption, Peter could continue working on this. And is there a way to do this concurrently, Peter, where you can, if that's the general direction, but if councillors have some further input over the next week, 2 weeks, we may still be able to massage that a bit. Is that doable?
Absolutely doable, because a lot of the report centers around just stating the facts around what the assets are and replacement cost. That work has been done. We can certainly start putting that into the report. In terms of the financial strategy, and the model is built and ready to look at different scenarios. So I think we can do that quite efficiently and effectively. So absolutely, that can happen concurrently.
So I guess we're looking for some direction from council. If you're comfortable with Peter starting to work on that final scenario presented, still knowing that you'll have the chance, we'll share the presentation with you, and if you have anything further to add, we can do that through email with Peter then.
Personally, I think it's the safety. Well, I know there's some risks with it, but really, we have some backup. We have some ways to mitigate some of the challenges that may be presented with that, should they arise. So I think it would be wise for us to follow that option 3. That's my opinion. I agree. But that's okay.
I think I certainly see the option 3 is probably one of the best paths forward. I do worry slightly about if we're talking about divesting in the current Wellesley Arena while we've got to reimagine the Wellesley Arena plan going. We're kind of writing we're putting a narrative to it in a way, or from the public's view. So I worry about that. I know that piece wasn't as big as the road portion may have been, and the 5%. So I worry about putting that tail into this asset management. We all know it's an option. However, I just worry about pushing that option at this time when we're going to the public, we're going through public engagement.
Yeah, and I guess I should add that the reason we felt okay with removing it at this time is we don't have any idea really what's going to happen with the facility, because that number could go either way, right? Because if it was decided through the reimagining that we were going to either do a revamp of that building or a replacement of that building, that number is going to go significantly higher, right? So with the unknown, to take it out today makes some sense, knowing again that this plan and strategy can be changed anytime. So if the final decision of council is a new $4 million structure there, we would just have to adjust the assets accordingly at that time, which would change the strategy moving forward.
Smiling. Sleep tonight either, a lot of numbers. So are we comfortable with where we're at now? You're going to send out your presentation. We're going to each have an opportunity to review it. We appear to have significant flexibility with this. You've got, I would say, a tentative direction. And that direction can be massaged one way or another once you come back to council, which I think is a fair way of looking at it. Councillor Brick? Yeah.
I think that's a good way forward. And if there's any pointed questions that you have of us, maybe they can be included in there to help.
Oh, absolutely.
I know it's a very big topic and it's a lot to digest. So if there's anything pointed that you want from us, just ask the question and we can work on an answer. But I'm okay with that.
Okay. I don't think we need a motion to that effect. Or do we?
Yeah, I think we're okay with that direction. Does that give you enough, Peter?
And the tentative direction given is good. Yes.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure as always.
Ethan, thank you. A lot of work in this. Excuse me. So we're going to move to the staff reports a little bit later. AF&P 12-2025, alternative voting method. The recommendation that the Council of the Township of Wellesley approve the alternative voting method of internet voting for 2026 municipal and school board election, and further that bylaw 13-2025 being a bylaw to provide for an alternative voting method for the 2026 municipal and school board elections be given first, second, and third reading at the May 13th, 2025 council meeting. A mover for that, please. Councillor Brick, second by Councillor Seven. And who's going to bring that forward? Amy?
Okay, so We may be in the throes of a federal election and just past a provincial election, but the 2026 municipal and school board election is only 18 months away. For the last two municipal elections, 2018 and 2022, the Township of Wellesley has offered a strictly alternative voting method of internet and telephone voting through an election help center with extended office hours. We were able to assist voters who are not confident in their ability to vote electronically. For the 2026 municipal election, staff are exploring options of hosting this help center within each ward during the voting period. The help center would include a voting kiosk and staff to assist electors. The telephone voting system we have worked with from both service providers in 2018 and in 2022 lacked finesse from an administrative and user perspective. They've been difficult to configure, and only 163 votes of the 2,029 votes were cast using the telephone method in 2022. If the election service provider selected offers telephone voting as an option in addition to internet voting, staff will return with a bylaw amendment to include telephone voting as an approved voting method. Some service providers are eliminating telephone voting from their services, so that played a part in recommending the strictly internet voting option, just to ensure that we're not limiting ourselves to select service providers. And that's all, if there's any questions.
Questions? I had one. So you were, in the report, you were suggesting that at each area there would be, you would set up an individual that would be able to sit there with a computer and help explain the situation to them. Would that, would people be able to vote at that point?
Yes, so what we've been discussing is setting up a help center on one day of the 10-day voting period in each ward. So St. Clements would have one specific day where a kiosk would be set up, a computer system, where electors would be able to come in and with assistance if needed, cast a ballot, but it would be still an electronic ballot.
So we're eliminating paper, so I think that's important. I'm concerned about those individuals that aren't familiar with one of these things. You know, seniors, for example. But if you're confident that that can be, that they can vote, then I think that's.
Yeah, and just to clarify, in 2018 and 2022, we did not offer paper ballots at all at any location, even our election help center.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Perkett.
The last two elections, were there, how many complaints were filed in regarding not having paper?
We did not receive any formal complaints regarding the voting method.
Okay. And if I live in St. Clements, I can go to the day in Wellesley and vote?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, this would
So I'd have 10 days that I could go vote?
Yes, correct. So the voting period would be open for 10 days, and it would technically be a vote anywhere type of election. Because wherever you can vote electronically, you can cast your ballot.
Just a follow-up, one day in each of those areas, you feel would be sufficient?
So what we've done during the past two elections, during the 10-day voting period, was extend our office hours at the township office, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and one Saturday. So it might fall similar to that. We're not exactly sure what the schedule would look like, but it would be at least one day in each ward, including the business hours of our administration office.
Okay, any other questions? Call the question, all in favor? And that's passed unanimously. AF&P 13-2025, recommendation that the Council of the Township of Wellesley adopt the customer service standards policy as attached to this report. Could I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Seven, seconded by Councillor Brick. And with Amy bringing that forward. Oh, Sam, sorry, Sam.
Thanks, Mayor Nowak. Council directed staff to create a customer service standards policy. This policy outlines guidelines for delivering high-quality, consistent, and effective customer service. One of the main items this policy highlights is response times. Customers can expect response times of 2 business days or less when an inquiry is received via phone or voicemail, email, or fax, and 10 business days or less when a written letter inquiry is received. If staff doesn't have an answer to the solution within that time frame, the customer can expect a follow-up within that time frame stating that they're still looking into the matter. An exception to this is unexpected absences such as illness. Along with this policy, we've created a list of standard voicemail and email auto responses. So the customer will always have a way of reaching somebody if they cannot get in touch with the person they're looking for. All recreation voicemails will state that if the person is calling with an urgent request, they should call the township main switchboard and press 0 for reception to make sure that their request is noted. The after-hours voicemail will continue to provide the number for the Region of Waterloo for any after-hours public works or recreation issues. The policy also makes mention of following the proper chain of contact when coming to the township with inquiries. Customers are encouraged to follow the chain of contact to get the best and quickest results and not to overlook the person that they should go to for a preferred staff member. In accordance with our right to disconnect policy, staff is not required to answer any phone calls, voicemails, or emails on holidays, weekends, or after hours. And in accordance with our respectful behavior policy, the customer is expected to treat staff with kindness and respect at all times. And lastly, it is good to note that this policy formalizes standard procedures that were, for the most part, already in place.
Okay, questions? Councilor Wagner.
I have a bit of a concern with the 48-hour turnaround, and I'll just use one scenario where I think the 48-hour turnaround could be an issue. So say you have a funeral and you need to secure a hall, and most funerals happen within, I would say, 5 days of the person passing. If you have to wait 48 hours to get a response back to secure one of the halls, I think that's a big concern. I think there should be a 24-hour turnaround for inquiries, whether it's, hey, I don't have an answer yet, but I'm going to get back to you, or, hey, here's your answer. I just have a concern about certain things that I think we need a quicker turnaround on than 48 hours because of restrictions to the timeline.
Yeah.
So in regards to that, so that's why we will have, so that'll be a recreation request. So that's why their voicemail will state that if you cannot get a hold of me and if this is an urgent request, to call the office, and then we'll deal with that at the administration office to make sure that that request is received.
So the administration office has an immediate turnaround, or is there also a lapse in turnaround with the administration office?
The administration office will have to get in touch with somebody at recreation, but we can do that as fast as we need to from our end for an urgent request.
Okay.
So the idea is that if you can't reach somebody there, if you come to us, we can figure out how to get you the answer that you need within that time frame. So there should be no issues going forward.
Okay.
Any other questions, Councilor Herrick?
You should say there's a 48-hour time where you have to reply. I guess my concern is that the reply would be, I got your email, I'll get back to you. It's not really it's just don't want it to become someone to come forward and say, yeah, I've emailed 3 times and they've replied, but they just said they're going to get back to me and haven't.
So the goal here is to, sorry, excuse me. The goal is to have a solution within that time frame. And if we don't, then yes, we will have to come back to the person and explain, this is where we're at, this is what we need to do, and you can expect to hear from me within this amount of days. Because we're not going to have a solution all the time within 48 hours, but we're going to try our hardest to.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Just want to add on the 24-hour. So we were looking at 24-hour originally. It becomes problematic putting that into a policy because there's often times where a staff member is away from their desk for a day at training or an illness. The 4-day work week also puts a wrench into that at times. So having the 48-hour covers those one-off scenarios, but as Sam explained, having that called redirected to the main switchboard, there's always an answer there, and then that person that answers will find a solution by going around to whatever staff member is necessary.
Okay. Oh, yeah, Councillor Seven?
Is there going to be some updates to the website?
Yeah, the website's actually going through a revamp, I guess. It's right now. We are updating pages currently before it gets migrated over to the new platform, which will be happening this year. I'm not sure the exact timeline on that yet, but it will be in the next few months. But the current pages are being updated and will reflect the new policies as well then.
Okay, any other questions? Call the question then. All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, AF&P 14-2025. This is for information. The recommendation that the Council of the Township of Wellesley receive this report for information, and I'll ask the Director of Corporate Services, I believe, to bring this forward. No? Oh, I need a motion first. Getting tired. Councillor Brick, second by Councillor Herget. Now the corporate.
Thanks, Council. So during the taxation year 2024, the Township of Wellesley billed an additional $276,000 in township property taxes. This amount, the lion's share of this amount is due to reassessments. So the Finance Department processed about $80,000 in supplemental taxes in 2024. Supplemental assessments are issued when there's a new value added to a property through building permits or new homes. So supplemental assessments applies when the value is added in the same year that the building is complete. So that represents about 81,000 of the 276,000. In 2024, the Finance Department billed approximately 230,000 in taxes for omitted assessments. And omitted assessments differ from supplemental tax assessments in that they go back to prior years. So when there's a change in the assessed value that relates to, so in this case, 2023 and prior, they're classified as omitted assessments, and that was approximately $230,000 that we collected. If you look at the report in detail on one of the following pages on, sorry, my page numbers are off here, but there's a few other changes, ins and outs, that get you to the 276, but the lion's share is due to changes in the taxes, supplemental taxes, 80,000, 81,000, omitted taxes about 231,000.
Okay. Questions? It's a good news report.
It's a good news report.
Well, the bottom line is we ended up with $276,000 more than what we had originally anticipated.
Right. Typically, we budget much less than that because we don't know what this number is going to come in at. So when we're doing the budgets, we're pretty conservative.
And where are we going to put that money?
So that money would ultimately go back into our reserves if we were in the position to do that.
You mean if we're in position? We're not sure if we're in the position.
Yeah, so I know we discussed earlier that we thought we were in a surplus. We're actually in a small deficit position.
Oh, I see. So that could balance out a little
Yeah.
bit. Okay. Any other questions? All in favor? And that's carried. Director's update.
Sure, a couple of quick updates from the finance side. So we're currently still interviewing for our financial analyst position. So we've done the telephone screenings, and we have 4 candidates that we'll be interviewing in person on Friday. So we're excited by that. We have what we think are some talented candidates. So we're optimistic that we're going to find our candidate in this pool of 4 individuals. And then the audit, the other update is the audit is ongoing. So MMP have been conducting the audit for the past few weeks. We think there's probably another 3 or 4 weeks that will be required to tie everything up. They're actually coming on site for the first time on Friday, so we get to meet the audit team from MMP. So good news on that side too.
No, good. Any questions? Okay, well, thank you. Nothing in there for, excuse me, information package, unfinished business. Oh, yes.
It's actually more like new business, but I don't see new business on here, so. So Tim, this is directed to your new department. In speaking with our bylaw officer in regards to an issue that had arisen in the township, I think it might be beneficial for us to ask the organization Pause to maybe come and speak to council in regards to what they do, who they're governed by, who they respond to, how they respond. They are supposed to be for animal welfare, basically, and they would check into situations of abuse, neglect, that type of a thing. But also in speaking with the clerk, the last time or first time that we tried to deal with them as well, they're maybe not as responsive. So it'd be interesting to know, are they not responsive because they don't work with us at a township level when there's an issue? I think it would be good to have them come and speak to us about what their organization actually does, because there are groups that have frequented our kennels in the past who have actually reported things to Pause. So I think it would be good for us to maybe have a chit chat with them.
Yeah, I don't see that being a problem. We have contact information for this organization.
I don't know, excuse me, I don't know that much about them.
No, and I think that's why it would be good for them to come, because I do know that they're supposed to deal with reports of animal neglect, animal abuse and that, and they can actually, I believe, bring charges against people, but that's what I'm not exactly clear on. And I think it would be good for us to understand that. And it would also be good for our bylaw officer to understand what they do, how they expect us to interact with them, that type of thing.
Isn't that the responsibility of our bylaw officer to do that work? To report abuse if they see it?
Yes, but this is an organization that you're supposed to report it to as well.
Why would we have a third party come in if we already have, that coverage, basically?
I don't believe that our bylaw officer can charge them, which this organization, I believe, can.
Yeah, so it's the provincial animal welfare system. So it's through the province of Ontario.
Oh.
And Councillor Wagner is correct. Our bylaw officer cannot charge for animal neglect or animal cruelty. That is a provincial offense.
Okay.
So not through our bylaw.
I was just a little bit concerned because I didn't know, and I know there are radical people out there.
Yes, yeah.
I want to get one involved in that sort of.
No, and that's why I thought it'd be good to speak to them, because they are provincial.
Yeah, we can put the request in.
Yep.
We obviously can't guarantee that they'll show up, but we can make the call to the province and see if they can send out a representative for a delegation one night.
Okay, thank you.
Direction. Okay. Anything else? New business? Next council meeting, May 13th, 2025. Committee of the whole meeting, May 27th. Council meeting, June 10th. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Wagner. All in favor? And that's carried.